Hello, everybody. This is Jared again from Cognigy with another episode of CX Disruptors. Today, I am excited yet again to have the lead analyst from Talking Points, Dave Michels, here with us.
Thanks, Jared. It is great to be recognized as a CX disruptor.
It's the least we could do.
At least,
but now
I
you have to
everything
prove it.
else. So why not the CX? But yeah, why not?
Well, we're going to make you prove it, though. So let's hold our horses here. So I'll jump right into question number one, and that is nice and broad. Why will AI have such a profound effect on the contact center?
Well, this is an easy one to predict because it's been going on for the past couple of years, really. So AI has been having a profound impact on the contact center in general, and I mean big. I mean every aspect of the contact center, whether it be scheduling or I want to say QM. I can't think what it stands for. Quality management, sentiment analysis, routing.
Yep.
Agent assist, self-service, you name it. Every aspect of the contact center has already been changing by AI over the past few years. But obviously this past year, with the introduction and availability of generative AI, everyone is just drooling about the potential disruption about to occur. And I say about to occur. I mean, it's been about a year since we saw the introduction of generative AI at least go mainstream.
Yep.
And the contact center has been cautious. I mean, the contact center is always cautious, and so we've seen some things like summarization. We've seen some dangling of the feet, as they say, over this space. But I think 2024 is going to just be a huge year. So I mentioned QM. One of the aspects of AI is that we've gone from sampling some calls, typical statistical analysis. You do a small sample. To analyzing every call, and so AI is completely causing a change in how we view things and how we approach things in the contact center. And then when you factor in the generative AI equation, it's much more capable of natural language, and it is enabling so much more. And we're just scratching at the surface right now. It doesn't get nearly as easily confused as a traditional AI conversational bot or something, which had a very narrow focus. Generative AI can steer it back on track if it needs to, and kind of understand what the person's doing or asking. It's much broader, much more natural experience. People are much more happier with these experiences. The trick and why it's taking so much time is that it's using these large language models, which are great for conversational skills, but most people aren't calling a contact center or typing a contact center with general internet inquiries. Like, it'd be great if all the calls you're getting at your contact center is, what's the capital of whatever state, but that's probably not the kind of calls you're getting. You're getting very detailed, specific calls. And so we're trying to bridge that gap between very specific, detailed knowledge in a contact center and this general large language model capability, specialized libraries into a general library, and that's been causing that's been requiring some research. Let's just say that some companies have been faster than others, and we know it's coming.
I feel like that's more of a misunderstanding, though, because I think a lot of people because their first experience was with ChatGPT, which is ultimately just like an internet-facing demo that people can play with. That's what they think it's for, and they don't understand this is just one small sort of public use case.
Yeah,
the reality is generating text is very broad. Like you said, you can use it for sentiment analysis, for so many other things. And I think part of it's education.
The bottom line is it generally understands conversations. And so if there's a conversation occurring, whether it be vocal or digital, it has a better chance of understanding what's going on and can create a much more, I'm going to say, human-like experience than the traditional bots that we may be used to and frustrated by in the past. But to your point about the chat GTP experience that everyone is getting, that chatbot is indeed just the beginning. I mean, that basic self-service facing experience is, yeah, I want to know what the capital of Ohio is, and it's going to tell me. That's great, and that's really just the beginning of where we're going. And there's so many more capabilities that we're finding, so many more use cases. And I think we're going to see a lot more. I think we're going to see a lot of this in 24, and we're going to see it around, routing. We're going to see it around scheduling. We're going to see it around forecasting, coaching. Agent assist is a big one. Yeah. Reporting is a big one, because now instead of writing a report and leveraging the data you may have, you can ask for the data that you want out of your content. So we're developing these new UIs, which is freeing up a lot of opening the imagination, I should say. Totally different use cases. We're seeing different vendors do different approaches. We're also seeing different LLMs and the large language models, and they're optimized for different types of things. And so there's a lot of opportunity, and we're just in the beginning. I mean, this stuff was state of the art, wet paint a year ago. This is a whole new era of AI. So we're going to see it. We're seeing a ton of research and development. We're seeing everybody kind of like, what can we do? What can we do? Let's see how far we can push this. So we're going to see a lot of new capabilities in the innovation space. Innovation pace is much faster than anything we've seen before. So hold on to your hat. It's just going to get a lot of change is about to occur in the customer contact space.
And I think, everybody sort of thinks like, oh, consider how much has changed, the different models that have been developed just since last November. And yet when you really think about the amount of resources being poured in by the largest tech companies in the world, 10 billion by Microsoft, 4 billion by Amazon, it's the change that's going to create is, essentially unpredictable at this point, but it will be big.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably a fair point to ask, is there anything that it won't really change in the contact center? How is it different from other innovations? Because we talked about it's going to go into, intelligent routing. It's going to assist agents live on the phone. It's going to be able to take over a lot of self-service.
We keep on inventing all these incredible new, inventions in our life that make modern life so much easier, like flying in an airplane and stuff like that. But the laws of gravity still apply, right? Yep. So some forces still apply and will always apply, at least for now, in the contact center. And so around generative AI, I think we're going to see a lot of things that don't change. For example, might be, they're still going to be keeping up with the Joneses. And so at first, there's going to be an opportunity to be first with these new technologies and realize some potential human savings, realize some potential opportunities for automation. But then as everyone does that, then we get back to where we were. And, so it's going to take some creativity to leverage these technologies, like always. That's the way it is now. IVRs were supposed to change the world, and then everybody implemented IVRs. Some implemented them very badly, I might add. And so it's just a technology, and what we do with it is up for grabs. And so your competitors don't go away; they have access to the same technology. I think overall we're going to see self-service gets better, but I want to emphasize there's still an art to self-service, and too much self-service is a bad thing. And if we kind of one of the things we've seen in the U.S. This past couple of years is the introduction of self-checkout at grocery stores. And, this was supposed to increase customer sat because it'll be shorter, faster lines. It was supposed to increase cashier satisfaction because less mundane work for small orders and whatever. It was supposed to reduce costs. It was supposed to do all these things. But for the most part, most supermarkets now are considering this a failure and pulling this stuff out. And it went wrong for a number of reasons. One of them was an increased theft. Another one is it didn't improve the experience at the grocery store. The customers were getting frustrated. The cashiers were getting frustrated because they didn't reallocate resources to doing other tasks. They got rid of the resources. And then the store started falling into disarray. And then it started being a circular effect. And so one after one, I'm reading headlines about how stores are pulling out the self-checkout. So we like to think that that self-service is a great thing, and generative AI will increase a great thing and improve a great thing. And so that's all good. but I want to just emphasize that there's art to self-service and finding that balance. And I can think of more self-service examples that are successes than I can that are failures. But
I think that's a good point.
Well,
you know, that everybody treats self-service like the holy grail, and to a certain extent it's true, but I think you're the first person that I've heard say, hey, wait a second, it's not always the best solution. And in fact, sometimes that extra human touch, though perhaps unnecessary, is still worth it.
You know, it boils down to what the brand is all about, right? And if the brand is a high touch brand or a luxury brand and things like that. But there's also a big hope that the generative AI will improve agent retention, and I'm not convinced it will. I think agent retention is always going to be a challenge because agents need to have a very specialized skill set. And if anything, we're raising that skill set. So the argument is because they have less of the mundane calls, the job is more interesting. But I'm not 100% convinced of that. I haven't seen any data to back that theory up yet. And I'm suspicious because of that supermarket example.
That's actually a really good comparison. It's so obvious, and yet I haven't heard it elsewhere. I really like that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a function really of how it's deployed. And like I said, any tool could be deployed for, the power could be used for good or evil, right? Yep. And so if they find savings and get rid of all their staff, then I'm not sure they've accomplished anything that they needed to accomplish. I'm just going to say that CSAT is still hard, and customer satisfaction, I should say, is still hard. And finding the right levers and mix to accomplish CSAT is still hard. It's still a match between cost and benefit. And generative AI maybe raises the bar on what we can do with technology, but it doesn't necessarily equate directly to spend this much on new technology and CSAT will go up the same amount or so. It doesn't quite work that way. So I think some things are going to remain pretty hard in the industry and pretty challenging.
I think that's a lesson that everyone has to learn every time, that no matter what comes out, as amazing as it may legitimately be, like you said, the laws of gravity or the laws of physics still apply. I'm going to hit you with one big one to finish up with. I think you've done a pretty good job proving your expertise so far, as we said in the beginning. Instead of looking forward, how do you think the CX industry will look back at this year?
Looking back at 2024, I think 2024 is actually going to be a significant year in the history of contact center. It may be the year the contact center completely disappears, to be honest, but let me explain that.
Yeah, please.
So the contact center is, we used to call it the call center, right? And then as we added more channels and voice, we changed it to the contact center. But it's still about a technology. And there's been lots of technologies in the contact center over the years. We went from voice to digital, I just described, but there's been things like self-service and various forms of automation, and they're all fairly contained. Let's do this, let's do that, and the whole industry jumps on these various innovations at the same time, which is great, and the industry moves forward. But now all of a sudden we're talking a much bigger vision around what we often call CX, or customer experience, or customer service, and we're moving away from the contact center. So and I think this is an important distinction, and I think generative AI is a big part of it. So I cover video conferencing, for example, and the term video conferencing has gone away. We don't call it video conferencing anymore because that's the technology. We tend to call it meetings or collaboration or something else, because we're now naming it what the result is, meetings, as opposed to the technology. And contact center is still the technology. It's like, it's about the contact center, it's about the technology to process inquiries, whatever. But when we start talking about CX, it's a whole different conversation. And we're talking more about the customer journey. We're talking more about CSAT. We're putting much more emphasis on the result. And this is causing a much bigger picture and a different way of looking at things with the customer journey. Now, the contact center has been, an entry point where people, start their inquiries into an organization, but it often requires data or integrations with things like CRM or order entry systems and all these other things. And the contact center was really about managing the conversation one way or another and getting data from somewhere else. But with generative AI, we're actually getting a lot of data from the contact center. These conversations are filled with gold. And trying to understand your customers and what that's important to them and what's driving inquiries. I mean, this is stuff that was kind of hard to figure out before, and it's becoming much more richer environment with generative AI to get that information. And so when you talk about CCaaS, for example, contact center as a service, the conversation tends to be one, an IT conversation, and two, it tends to be about things like cloud delivered services and evergreen software or OpEx versus CapEx, et cetera. But when you talk about CX, you're talking about a business conversation now. You're talking about marketing, you're talking about customer service, you're talking about customer satisfaction. And then you need more data. Actually, I skipped a step there. Because this is all based on artificial intelligence is based on data. And because the contact center is generating all that data, the contact center is completely changing. And we have to completely look at contact center in a different way because, for example, average handling time is a statistic that we've been using for a long time and we want to drive that number down. But maybe if the contact center is much more, the CX environment is much more about collecting data, maybe average handling time is much more important. And because we've automated many of the simpler inquiries, that interaction becomes much more full of gold. And we want to increase the AHT. It's a totally different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And so I think because of the data argument, there's this whole we're seeing competition in this space from companies that are not traditional CCaaS providers. We are seeing an opportunity to leverage the data in new ways. And we're even seeing the CCaaS companies moving away from their CCaaS speak and into more CX speak. And so I think that 2024 is going to be a pivotal year where we reimagine CX and not just the contact center. So that's how I think we're going to look back. Maybe it's the year that contact center died. Maybe we'll see. And that might be too bold of a statement. That is too bold of a statement because
I think on its face it sounds bold, but maybe where it becomes seen or more accepted as part of a larger whole and not as its own entity.
But another big transition that's occurring, and I kind of touched on this, but if the contact center has been focused on channels. We've been, the last 10 years has been all about omni-channel. We've been adding more channels, adding more digital channels. The new contact center is going to be much more focused on data and leveraging that data and managing that data, containing that data, cleaning up that data. And most of that data was not collected in ways that were ideal for AI. And so we're going to be spending a lot of time reorganizing our data, reformatting our data. Microsoft's talking a big thing about Copilot as a personal desktop tool. And one of the things they say is that Copilot will scan your drives that you have access to as an individual user and leverage that data. But people are going to start discovering that they have a ton of data on their drives that's completely irrelevant and obsolete, that's going to throw off our AI assistants, right? Yeah. So you might have proposals in there that were never approved or never finalized, never even submitted. You might have all kinds of projects. You might have all kinds of stuff in your drives that is going to throw off Copilot. And so it's like, I love the idea of what they're offering, but we're going to have to go back and clean up our data. And I think we're going to see that even on a bigger picture in the contact center. There's just tons of data that's in different departments, and we've got to bring it together. So it's going to be a much bigger focus. That shift from channels to data, I don't think people are fully appreciating yet. And so I think we're going to see a lot of data reorganization.
I think the training data is a topic that comes up a lot related to LLMs, because people somehow expect that these are machines that are designed to recite facts, which is just simply not the case. But if we have AI and it's you correctly said, it's going to be getting a lot of great data from being able to monitor and analyze every conversation. But again, we've got a selection bias issue because people who are happy don't call, they don't write. So, again, this is one of this, what's going to happen when the AI suddenly learns every customer's mad, every customer hates me.
That's right. And I guess it's the same question. I'm not sure if we changed questions or not, but you asked about 24.
Yeah.
I think another big change that's going to occur, and is starting to occur already, is that people are much more open to using automation. In the past 20 years, I got an automated bot, and I was the one yelling, operator, representative, whatever it took to get me out of this hellhole, because self-service wasn't very effective, and I had a pretty good idea if self-service wasn't going to help me or not. So if I had decided it wasn't going to help me, get me out, anything it takes. I am already finding that I'm much more open personally to using self-service, because self-service is getting so much better. And I think we're going to see this transition in the public become a widespread phenomena. And it's even going to get to the point, I had a new credit card in the mail, and it required that I call in and activate the credit card. And that's a thing we've done for years. And you get some machine and you enter your codes and whatever, and the credit card's active. I called a recent one, and I got a live operator, and I wasn't happy about that. I was like, what a stupid credit card company. These guys are the idiots. This is something that should have been automated. And I think we're going to have that epiphany more often moving forward, which I've never had that you never get a live operator. I want the machine, but I think we're going to start having that more and more, because you're calling to do something basic and simple. Maybe it's confidential, maybe it's involving financial, whatever, and you don't want to talk to somebody. You don't want to deal with a human necessarily if you don't have to. The issue is now that we often have to, and so I think we're going to see big change in expectations. And once the expectations change, and the technology is changing, and we're opening up all this data and these new capabilities, that's why I'm saying 2024 is going to be a big transitional year.
And I think that's a great point on which to end. And, thank you very much. I particularly like the self-checkout example. That's definitely going to stick with me. And again,
I think you don't like those experiences, those self-checkouts.
I just dealt with one several times last week at a local Kroger. I was not particularly happy about that. It just led to longer lines with the agents, with the cashiers, and a disaster at the self-checkout.
Yeah.
Just beeping machines, and nobody understood what was wrong. But we won't go into that. So thank you again for taking the time and sharing all these great insights with us.
A pleasure.
All right. Bye.